Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfoud, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
This is an encore presentation of Faith and Sport. Tune in to hear Faith and Sport live Monday afternoons from 2 to 3 right here on Carolina Catholic Radio Charlotte, AM 1270. It's Monday afternoon, and you know what that means. It's Faith and Sport time on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network, AM 1270 WCGC. We're also streaming live at carolinacatholicradio.org and the Carolina Catholic Radio app. We hope you'll stay tuned in for the next hour for Faith and Sport here on Carolina Catholic Radio. And without further ado, here is your host for Faith and Sport on this Monday afternoon, Dr. John Acquaviva!
Chris, that got longer each time, or at least the last couple of weeks. Folks, welcome to the show. However, wherever you are listening from, remember, you can check us out 3 different ways. Some of you folks are listening AM 1270. Other folks are listening on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network app, and you just hit listen live. Or you can go to carolinacatholicradio.org and hit listen live there, too. We know that a bunch of people are listening from a bunch of different ways, and we welcome you to the show. This is Faith in Sport, where we apply our Catholic faith to all aspects of sport. So if you're a parent of an athlete, if you're an athlete, if you're an administrator or a referee, but most of us are fans, and that's who, in part, this show appeals to. So I think we have something for everybody. I want to give a special hello to our former regular co-host, Ed Billick. And I just got off the phone with him a little while ago, and he's traveling from his family's place in Pennsylvania back down here. And he says he's listening on the app, and we're coming in loud and clear.
Oh, really? Hi, Ed. How's it going? Good to have you tuned in today.
I know. In fact, it was funny, Chris, because Ed and I started talking about just stuff in the world of sports, and I knew one of us was going to say at one point, and he just goes, well, this is just the show, right? We were just talking about the show. But no, in fact, Ed is one of the reasons I mentioned that is I thank Ed for being a supporter of the show, but also he's going to be joining us at least. He's going to try to join us one day a month, one Monday a month, the first Monday of each month. So, Ed, you heard it. I put it out there officially, buddy, so you got to do that. But, no, I just appreciate when you make that effort. I appreciate when you hear just the dynamic in the studio is different, and I have even more energy than I normally do. Is it possible, Chris, for me to get more energy?
That's right, and I feel more energized, too, and Ed's here. He just fills the room with energy.
Just the name of Ed Billick fills the room with energy. But
that's right.
No, you guys have something to look forward to in next week's show, but something to look forward to this week's show. Got all kinds of stuff to talk about. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to do the hit and miss. Chris, you even got a hit and miss.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so we're going to come back to that. Our guest is going to be Carlos Herrera. He normally joins us for the hit and miss, but he's going to be our guest today, and we're going to talk all things sports. But in particular, I want to ask him, as a certified youth soccer coach, I want to ask him, how should the coach or the coaches address referees, especially when they think they're doing a bad job? Do you do it during the game? What do you say? Do you do it after the game? And one of the reasons I'm mentioning this is because last week, Chris, you might remember, we had 2 guys in here from my daughter's softball team. I thought they did a particularly good job in coaching my daughter, and I thought they did a good job of coaching young girls in the sport of softball. And we asked them a bunch of questions, but I didn't really ask them about that. So
yeah, I know. We had a great show. If we had another hour, we could have gone another hour with that.
In fact, the next time I have somebody in studio like that, I think I'm going to ask maybe our chairman, David Papandrea, just go, hey, can we just stay on for another half hour if we just feel the energy to do that? I have a feeling he would say something like that, but either way, it's an hour, and we try to pack it with good stuff each and every week,
right.
And it's a bunch of days during the week. And Chris, tell the folks, in case that they want to pass this on to somebody else, if they hear something on the show that they think somebody else should listen to, but they didn't catch the live show here from 2 to 3, when else can they catch the show on AM 1270?
Yeah, we have several encore presentation times. Like tonight, you can hear encore broadcast of the show from 10 till 11, and you can also hear a rebroadcast tomorrow night from 8 until 9, and Wednesday from 11 until 12. And on the weekends, on Saturdays, you can hear the broadcast from 4 to 5, and Sunday afternoons from 2 to 3. So you've got plenty of opportunities to hear Faith in Sport if you miss it live on Monday afternoon, but we hope you don't. But if you do,
that's right.
Listen in to one of the encore presentation times to hear what you missed.
Thank you, Chris. And continue to go down that show rundown. After Carlos joins us, we're going to take a little break. Then when we come back from the break, we'll do weekend headlines, some stuff that's going on in the world of sport. I don't have enough ink in my jet printer to fill out all the stuff that's going on this weekend, but I'll keep it, as I always do, to less than 5 minutes. We'll do the quick Q&A with Dr. Ray, where Chris shoots a couple questions at me, and we're going to try something different. The last few weeks, in fact, since the inception of the show in the summer, we've been doing the Cathlete of the Week, right, Chris?
Right.
Now we're going to start with the Pope Quote of the Week, because over the last 100-plus years, our wonderful popes have made a bunch of different comments about sport and the athlete, people involved in sport. And we're going to do a quote, and I'll just give some commentary on that. But they've said some wonderful things, so that's what we've got going on today. Now, Chris, before we get to our hit and miss, in which I know yours is going to be about the Redskins, so yeah. I'm just going to, break my heart right there and beat everybody to the punch on what yours is. But I want to mention something different.
Okay.
Tan Books has just released my latest book. It's called Proving Your Body Image Through Catholic Teaching, How Theology of the Body and Other Church Writings Can Transform Your Life. And that's my name. Chris can attest to that. Chris, does this look cool or what? They did a nice job with the cover. And it says at the bottom, John Acquaviva, PhD. That's me.
Yep.
And Tan Books has just released this, folks. And here's what I want to do. They sent me a small box of them for me to give away. So I am going to give one away to the first person who emails me at faithandsport@wingate.edu. In fact, the address is faithandsport@wingate.edu. So the first one to email me, just send me your name, your address, and I'll send you this book. And this is basically, it's meant for the young adults. So anywhere between the ages of 15 and 35 would probably benefit most from this. Again, it's Improving Your Body Image Through Catholic Teaching, a book that's just been released by Tan Books. And you can check it out. In fact, all other books at tanbooks.com. It's also sold on Amazon if for some reason you don't win this one today. And also, while you're searching for that, you might notice that also I've written a book a couple years ago called Raising Kids with a Healthy Body Image, and that is for Catholic parents. And that can be found on Amazon as well and through En route Books and Media. So I just want to give that little shout out to Tan. Thank you for publishing this book. It looks great. It reads great. And it's a quick, fast read at less than 150 pages. Or actually at less than 170 pages. So I'll keep an eye on my email, Chris, and I'll let you know the first person to pop in to get this free book. But
okay.
Chris, I'm glad you're here because you could... you can mirror my thoughts on this. I thought they did a great job. It just looks really cool.
It does.
Very good, folks. So thanks again for joining us here on Faith and Sport. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. I'm an exercise scientist during the day, and then after I leave the university on Monday afternoons, early Monday afternoon, I put on a cape, I put on a mask, I fly over here, and I do the Faith and Sport show, and I change. Actually, there's not all that much of a difference between what we talk about here and what I talk about in class, but certainly it's not the same thing because in exercise physiology, I talk about strength and conditioning, sports nutrition, and I also talk about what's called exercise physiology, which is how does the body adapt and change as a result of regular exercise. So let's do this, Chris. Let's remind the folks, again, if they're just joining us, they're listening to Faith and Sport, but that there's 3 different ways to listen in on the show. And please, folks, if you have a referee, administrator, an athlete, a parent of an athlete, especially if they're faithful, I think they're going to get a lot out of the show. Pass the show along to them. Let them know that there's a bunch of ways that they can listen. AM 1270 on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network app and on carolinacatholicradio.org. So I'm getting better at that, aren't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I used to look to you and go, is it .com or .org? What is that?
I'm glad to know I'm rubbing off on you.
All right, so I tell you what, you go first. We're going to do our hit or miss of the week. Your hit was just simply a win by a team that hasn't been doing that much lately. What's your hit of the week?
Yes, it's about my team, the Redskins. There's not been a whole lot to be proud of from the Redskins this season, but yesterday they made me really proud because why? Because they actually had a win over John's team, the Detroit Lions. They beat the Detroit Lions 19-16, and that's the number one hit of the show today.
That's right. In fact, Chris, let me ask you this: Did you didn't watch any part of the game, right?
No, I didn't get to see it in this area.
But now, how did you follow the game? Were you just watching other football, and then you were watching the scores at the bottom, or were you checking out scores online?
No, I have an app on my phone.
Oh, got it.
that I keep up with my teams.
Now, tell me
that
this.
way.
On that app, let's say a touchdown just happens and the Redskins score a touchdown. Can you, like, immediately through that app go to the video of it? Because I think some games, they release the video shortly after it happens. Mm-hmm. Now, tell me this. This is the bigger question. Was the Redskins winning the hit, or was the Lions losing the hit?
That's kind of a hard one.
Actually, I was just kidding, but there's some seriousness in your voice. That is crazy. But no. In fact,
because after they had that win, I was like, "Oh man, I can't wait to do the show Monday and just rub that into John," because he's always talking about how sad he is over his Detroit Lions.
I know.
He's just rubbed more salt into that wound.
Absolutely, I know. In fact, I am happy for them. But we mentioned this off air just last week. I said to you, do you want them to win or do you want them to lose so they can get a higher draft pick? And I could tell the way you looked at me. You're like, both, right? Because they win both ways, right? But ultimately, I would not want a bad team like that to win. In fact, at this point, the Lions aren't very good. Just lose the rest of the games and get But you know how many decades we've said that?
Yeah.
We say that decade after decade, and we've had one playoff win since 1957.
Yesterday's game just shows that little by little they're making improvement towards next season, and their win over the Lions yesterday just shows they're improving little by little, and the Detroit Lions are just staying the same.
No, I know. No, there's a lot of truth in what you just said. But no, actually the Lions are a decent team, and that was a good win for the Redskins to win that game. Was it rainy or anything? I have to ask Carlos because he's from the D.C. area, but I don't think it was rainy.
I don't think it was, no.
Yeah, so there's really no excuse for the Lions. we kept slipping. We couldn't catch the balls. All kinds of crazy stuff was happening. All right, folks, stay tuned.
The fans were too loud.
That's right. The fans were way too loud. We couldn't hear anything, Coach. It was terrible. So our guest coming up here in a couple minutes is Carlos Herrera. He's a certified youth soccer coach. You probably recognize his name. You certainly will recognize his voice if you're a regular listener to the show, and he's going to come and talk about – I want to talk to him about tackling because him and I – the way we met was through rugby, and I want to talk to him about tackling. Remember, Chris, Matt Burke, the former NFLer, we were talking about – and he goes, there's enough rules in the game. Remember that? Mm-hmm. So Carlos and I are going to talk about that. I think he's going to have an interesting take on that. And also we're going to talk about, in particular, about referees and how coaches should handle that. So, folks, this is the show for you. If you're a parent of a kid of any age, I think that's one of the things that we do on this show regularly is how should parents interact with the coach, interact with their player, kid, with the referee, with other fans, whatever the case is. But before Carlos calls in, let's do the hit and miss from me. Chris, you probably know about this. It has to do with the Steelers-Browns game that was a week ago Thursday.
Oh, yeah.
Now, to the listener, they might go, wow, Doc, man, all this stuff has happened over the last 10 days, and you're making this the hit or miss? But stuff continues to creep out about that situation. But here's one of the things, just to give a little background on it. It was toward the end of the game. The Steelers were losing 21-7 against the Browns, and Myles Garrett, the defensive end for the Cleveland Browns, hit Mason Rudolph, the quarterback for the Steelers, with 8 seconds left in the game. But as he was throwing the ball, some people said it was a late hit. To tell the truth, I thought it was a well-timed hit. Did you see the replay of that?
Yeah.
And I thought it was well-timed. What did you think? I didn't ask you on air last week. Was it a late hit, you think?
No, it didn't look like a late hit to me.
I mean, he got rid of it, and I thought he was getting hit as he got rid of it. I thought that was a decent call. Now, for folks that have no prior experience with what happened, they skirmished on the ground. They're obviously yelling at each other. It looks like Mason Rudolph, the quarterback for the Steelers, tried to kick Myles Garrett between the legs, and he got up, and then he was really upset, and he pulled Mason Rudolph's helmet so hard that the chin strap unbuckled and he just ripped it off his head. And then as some of the offensive linemen for the Steelers, the teammate of Mason Rudolph, came to his defense, he reached over both of them and he clobbered Mason Rudolph on the head. And it was that move. To tell the truth, I don't know which one it was. So he pulled that helmet off. That was a violent act, wasn't it? Just to get that helmet off. Mm-hmm. And then he hit him over the head basically as hard as he possibly could. Mm-hmm. And the outcome, there's a whole lot of things that came as a result of this. But Myles Garrett was fined $45,000, but without pay indefinitely. So he's suspended, and without pay, and they think it's going to go not just the rest of this year, which there's a couple more games, but that might even bleed into next season. So whether they make it to the playoffs this year, the Browns have a chance. If they make it to the playoffs, he can't play in any game, but the big thing is he's suspended without pay, and he has to pay a fine on top of that. Mason Rudolph was fined $50,000. I never quite understood that, but I was talking to Ed off air, Chris, and I said, Ed, do you have any insight on this? Why would Mason Rudolph get fined $50,000 but not get suspended? And Myles Garrett, who was suspended because of his actions, was only fined $45,000. And neither of us could come up with an answer, but I think it's because he wasn't suspended. In other words, a guy that's not suspended will fine him more. But a couple of the Steeler players were fined. Both teams were fined. I think it was $250,000. I think it was a big deal. But do you know the latest thing that came out, why Myles Garrett said he actually hit him? He said there was a racial slur when they were on the ground. And here it is. It's problematic for two reasons. If Mason Rudolph said something in the heat of the moment, even a racial slur, that was unexcusable, right? And that's why he got mad. But some people are claiming, even those teammates of Mason Rudolph, who one of them at least was black himself, he said he didn't hear anything. And it's quite possible. It's quite possible Myles Garrett, the player from the Browns, said this is because he saw the aftermath of this. He saw that he was going to be suspended, or he knew he was going to be suspended, and he wanted to lighten it and not be seen as a bad guy, and maybe he had the NFL change their mind. And I'm hoping he didn't, but it's possible he made it up. Either way, this is bad. And I feel bad for all involved. I think they all wish they could take this back. This was certainly the ugly head of NFL and some of the players, as a result of such actions. I think they would redo it if they could, and it was certainly an ugly part of the NFL when guys get mad after the play's over, and I really hope that because one of those two guys is lying, Mason Rudolph either said a racial slur or Myles Garrett is lying about that. Either way, one of those guys has to ask for forgiveness, and I hope that in some private, discussion between the two of them, that's rectified, because only those two guys probably know the truth. And I hope there's a conversation between the two of them, because that is ugly language there, especially in this day and age of all this racist-based dialogue that we have a lot, and racism in our culture and so forth. We just don't need that on the football field. We don't need it anywhere, but we especially don't need it there, where these guys are. It's truly a fraternity in all of these sports, and they need to treat it as such. So that's my miss of the week. All right, folks, thank you for joining us here on Faith in Sport. I understand we have Carlos Herrera on the line.
Yes, we do.
Let's bring Carlos on right now. He is a certified youth coach. He joins us just about each week with our hit or miss of the week, but he's going to join us for a longer conversation today. Carlos Herrera, welcome back to the show.
Hi, John. Dr. Acquaviva, good to hear from you. Good to be on the show again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great, Carlos. Thank you for doing this. I think you always have great insight on such matters, and I'm going to switch gears with you a couple times, but I'm going to start out with this, Carlos. 2 weeks ago, I had on former NFL player Matt Burke, and Matt played in the NFL for 14 years. He played most of it with the Minnesota Vikings, played the last few years with the Baltimore Ravens, ended up winning a Super Bowl. That's a side point with the Ravens. But one of the things I asked him, Carlos, is I brought up the sport of rugby, something that not only you and I love, the sport that we love, but this is how we met, right? We met through the sport of rugby years ago at George Mason University when we were a lot younger. We had a lot more hair than we do now. But I asked him, Carlos, whether they should adopt the rules of rugby, and that is they should only be allowed to tackle using what we call form tackling. You have to wrap the person, you have to bring them to the ground and so forth, and none of this spearing with the helmet. And I could tell, Carlos, that he did not really want to entertain that. He said, we've made enough changes in the NFL, and his bottom line was this: it's a violent sport. We have to accept that it's a violent sport. People get taken down when they're carrying the ball by being tackled, and people protect the ball carrier by blocking. This is just the nature of the game. But here's my question to you. It's a twofold question. Should they make it a rule, in your opinion, that you must wrap? And second of all, if you don't, should you create a rule, should the NFL create a rule where you remove that player from the field, but the big thing is, Carlos, do not replace him like they do in the sport of rugby? Because you know that, right? Like, if it's an egregious hit, you can be removed right then and there. But if it's a second time, usually that's when you're removed, right? We have what are called yellow cards and then red cards, just like soccer. And if you get a red card, the difference is you cannot replace that player. Let's take the first question first, and that is, would you like to see that, or do you like the spearing that occurs in the game?
Well, to answer directly, I don't think you should be doing the spearing. I think everybody who plays their own sport has a particular loyalty to their sport. So I think when you start bringing rules from another sport, I think most people would, if you play a particular sport, would say, no, that's not necessary. I definitely think that would minimize what they're trying to do is minimize injury, and I think that's something that you should do, because you clearly can use those pads and those helmets as a weapon, and people do.
Yep.
So I agree. I think they need to do something to kind of minimize that. I think the form tackling is one of the things, and wrapping, I think, is another one, because it hurts all sorts of athletes when you try to knock them out.
Yep.
So I would say yes to that question.
Now, I know this is pretty extreme, and I think the former NFLer and probably most fans would laugh at me, but I remember that was one of the ways as a player. I played for 15 years. I've been a referee. I've been a certified referee now for over 10 years, and I think that the opportunity or just the chance that the referee can throw out that red card on poor tackling and dangerous play, that it keeps people from doing that. Now, here's the problem. In the NFL, even when they're removed, Carlos, they're allowed to replace the guy who goes out. In other words, some all-pro guy, some guy's been playing in the league for 3 years, with another guy that's going to be all-pro. So is it really a penalty, and are they really going to stop this? What if they came out with this, Carlos, and they said, next year, if you spear, you get removed from the game, but you do not get anybody to replace him? Is that going too far in the sport of the NFL?
I would say that it probably is, and I mean, again, being from both having played soccer and rugby and also football, I think when you change a rule a little bit too much in a particular sport, I think it starts to change too quickly, too much.
Yeah. But
I think taking out a player who's really good and you put in another player, there is a disadvantage. It's almost like basketball when you foul out.
Yeah.
And it doesn't eliminate you, but it really affects you as a player that you've been taken out of the game, and you could be one of the impacting players. But I think playing with one player less, I mean, the chances are that they'll start running over you. Like, I just think that it changes the competitiveness of the game too much, right?
Understood.
But I think there should be something where you get suspended for the next game, right? Like, you get tossed out, like a sample of the red card in soccer where you get tossed out of this game, but you also get tossed out of the next game.
Yep.
Right? And I think that is something which you got to have an impact. Your rules have to have a consequence, otherwise they're worthless.
That's right. Now, let me ask this about soccer. So let's say it's in the very first minute and you get red carded. You're out the rest of that game and the very next game after that, correct?
It's exactly correct.
What if it's the last minute of the game? It's the same thing. In other words, you get red carded in the last minute of the game, but then, so in essence, you're just out the next game, and that's the rule, and they just haven't adjusted it accordingly. In other words, if it's in the first half, right, they could make different rules on where, but is that what happens? Even if it's in the last minute or the first minute, the outcome's the same. You're out for the rest of that game and then the next game.
Yeah, so it's a real impact. I mean, if you're out, for part of the first, half, that's a big impact to everybody else. And that's the thing, it impacts everybody else. Everybody else has to play harder. And I don't know the statistics, but I think the statistics actually are pretty good that the team that goes down a man actually does better than you would expect, because the other team gets overconfident and the team that's down a man plays a lot harder. So, but the point is your team gets affected and the player gets, banned from the next game.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean, that we want to, the one thing about sports, especially professional sport and even college sport, there's tradition, right? There's a tradition within the game. There's a tradition within the rules. And I understand it from your standpoint that let's just enforce the rules that are in play, and that will create better on-field play. I get that. I would like to see the rugby part of me, the rugby coach and the rugby referee, I should say, part of me, would like to see a stronger consequence for not only that player but that team, because I really believe, Carlos, if you really want to stop that, that would stop that. But one of the things that bothers me, and you as a Redskins fan, this must drive you crazy as well at all levels, high school, college, but in particular in the pros, because those guys want to save their shoulders and they want to save their arms. They will spear a guy all the time. You can, if you watch a full game, full 4-quarter game, you can see 5, 6, 8, 12, 15 tackles in which the defensive back often is who it is. They'll spear the running back or the receiver. The guy loses his balance just for a second, but then he marches on. And I'm thinking, if no other reason, Carlos, wrap the guy up. He's going to go down. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, we could talk for a whole show just on this, wrapping and pads versus not wrapping and not playing with pads. I mean, I think the NFL has put in a lot recently, in the last couple of years, about not leading with your head.
They have.
Both the player that hits and the player being hit.
They have.
Right? And I think they're doing a pretty good job. But, I mean, the NFL has, and this is one of these things, and I think you could agree, both as a player of rugby and as a ref, the NFL is just having too many rules. When you have to constantly come up with rules to keep to kind of regulate a game, it's like an endless thing, right? Because they're just, and I'm not a purist in any of the sports. Like I think for any sport, hockey and soccer in particular, if the players are getting bigger, you make the goal bigger, right? Like I think offense sells, right? And so you got to kind of adjust. Just because the goal has never been increased in the size for years, I mean, players are getting stronger, players are getting bigger. I think you have to, adapt to make the sport a little bit more, just like they're doing in baseball. Baseball is suffering from lower popularity, and they're trying to speed up the game. They're trying to, reduce some of the advantage that maybe the pitchers have or the batters have. I mean, and I think you have to do that every once in a while. But football, man, the amount of rules that and then has to be translated, I think takes away from the game.
No, in fact, you know what? I meant to talk about this earlier. In fact, I was thinking about making this my hit or miss, my actual miss. But you know that now coaches can throw the red flag if they suspect that there's been defensive pass interference, right?
Yes. Yes.
And the reason that came about, and I'm not exaggerating here, was because in the playoffs between the Saints and the Rams last year in the NFC Championship game, there was an egregious call that was missed. And the Saints made such a big stink about it that the NFL changed its rule. Now, I understand, and this is to your point that you mentioned a minute ago, talk about all the rules. I understand, like, over months and maybe even years, there is concern from the coaches, concern from the players, concern of the owners, and even the fans that they go, well, let's take this under advisement and see if we should change this rule. As a direct result, Carlos, of that pass interference, which was bad, which probably would have ended the game for the Rams. The Rams end up winning the game. They end up going to the Super Bowl against the Patriots and so forth. Regardless of that, the NFL changed to a rule that now a coach can throw out the red flag just to protest or to contest a pass interference call. Now here's the corker on it. Yesterday in the Panthers-Saints game, Chris, did you watch the Panthers-Saints game?
I got to see a little bit of it, yeah.
Did you see the play toward the end of the game? Now listen to this, Carlos. This is unbelievable, right? It's at the end of the game, and the Panthers have the ball. I think it was within the 10-yard line, right? And there was an incomplete pass. It was 4th down, right? And Rivera throws the red flag. He asked them to review whether there was pass interference or not. Carlos, they showed it in regular motion, and I said, there's no pass interference on these plays, right? And then they showed it in super slow-mo, and in just about in every situation where there was a receiver and a defender, the defender could have been called for pass interference. And see the irony there, and it was the Saints were the ones that could have got busted. Needless to say, there was no pass interference called. There should have been. In fact, after I saw it, there was at least 2 instances in that play. And, of course, once you watch something in super slow-mo, Carlos, you could catch anybody doing anything, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought there was some irony there, and it was almost comical that they should have gotten probably burned by that same call. But, no, you make a good point, brother, and I think a lot of people would be in agreement. In fact, who wouldn't be in agreement? My goodness, the rules. And
as if there's not already too many yellow flags going out. Now there'll probably be too many red flags going out.
Oh, my gosh, it's crazy.
It's one. For the Saints game, right? And that robbed the whole team and a whole city of what was very visibly pass interference, right?
That's right.
So it's like in soccer. It's like when they used to not have the camera, right? Like instant review.
Yep.
Like in soccer, they would call a goal, no goal, or goal, or if it was a foul in the box or not a foul in the box, or if it was offside or offside. Like when it's egregious. Because we have the ability to see it in replay, as a fan, you're livid, right?
Oh,
so, like, you want them to get the calls right.
Of course.
But, in football, only certain calls can be reviewed, right? And so it's like, and I think that's what drives people crazy. It's like, well, that's such an impacting play that there's got to be some sort of review if it's wrong.
No, exactly. And I understand that we want to get it right, but I'm serious about this. I wouldn't doubt if 5-10 years from now, they have created so many rules and there's so many flags and so many instances. Baseball, the same, all these different sports that have all these reviewable plays. I wouldn't doubt that if the fans get so tired of it, Carlos, they might just go, we're taking out replay. We're just going to go on how the umpire or the referee sees it. Let's just do that. Carlos, do you remember a long time ago, this is in the 80s, Diego Maradona for Argentina?
The hand of God. Of course. Everybody knows the hand of God.
Everybody doesn't know that. So just to set it up, his hand hit the ball in a crucial part of a World Cup game. I think it was the semifinals. And after the game, they said, did your hand touch the ball? And his response was, it was the hand of God.
Yeah, it was like a corner kick or something, and he went to head it, and he wasn't even that close to it, and his hand was a little further out, and it was his hand that hit it in, not his head, and so you couldn't really tell, but that was the famous the hand of God.
I know, but the reason I love that story, of course, it was so clever. He didn't even hesitate. He just said, "Yeah, no, I didn't touch it. It was the hand of God." But no, the reason I bring this up, Carlos, is something I talked about. I don't remember if it was with you, but it was something I talked about on the program just a couple weeks ago. When we are fans, we sign up for our hearts to be broken. We sign up to be frustrated. We sign up to go through losing streaks and to have these highs and lows. And the refs getting stuff wrong is just part of the process of being a fan. And here's the corker. And I've said this too many times on this radio show. Even though we have replay, Carlos, too many times they still don't get it right. They'll watch the replay, and I'll go, he fumbled that ball. And they're like, after further review, there was no fumble on the play. And I'm like, what the...
Yeah.
What the heck?
Well, it's like, taking it to the World Series game. What was it, Game 6, where the base runner, I forget who it was, ran to first base, and there's some archaic rule about you cannot interfere with the pass of the ball.
Right. Michael Turner.
First base.
Trey Turner. No, it was Trey Turner on a throw to first base, yeah.
Yeah, and it was such a huge play, and it was reviewed.
Oh, yeah.
And you're looking at it, and you're going, like it's probably 50-50, right? And, if you're a Nats fan, it's even the percentage even greater that it was no fouling from Houston. But it's like, so, there, it's still a judgment call, right? Like, even the video, it's still a judgment call.
That's right.
Somebody's not going to be happy.
That's right. Carlos, let me test your World Series memory. Even though that call went against the Nats, what did the very next batter do to kind of nix that bad call against him?
I believe he hit a double.
No, Rendon hit a home run.
It was consequentially that particular call didn't affect the game because
Thank God.
That's were resilient. Yeah, and you hate a game to come down to a call, and I think that's what everybody doesn't, that would irk anybody, that one call makes such an impact event. They always talk about that. In soccer, you don't want the referee to be the guy who affects the game, right? You want to let him play. And as a ref, how do you look at that? Like, how much is your role, should you have? I think rugby's maybe a little bit more dry cut.
Yeah. Folks, we're talking to Carlos Herrera, certified youth soccer coach from the D.C. area. He's been coaching soccer for years. He's a former soccer and rugby player. Him and I have known each other for 30 years, as you can probably tell. He's one of dear friends of mine. But thank you for joining us here on Faith in Sport. You can check us out 3 different ways. You're probably listening AM 1270 or the app, the Carolina Catholic Radio app, or you can listen live through the website, carolinacatholicradio.org. Now, Carlos, we flirted with the World Series and the Nats conversation a little bit, so let's come back to that. Has the Nats buzz worn off?
No, it hasn't.
Oh, that's awesome.
Everybody's still on fire.
Now tell me this, Carlos. Is it quite possible that one of the reasons that people are still on fire is because the fire went out so long ago with the Redskins?
Well, the Washington Post apparently did a poll on Thursday, and they said, which is the most popular team in D.C.?
Let's hear it.
And, not surprisingly, the Nats came in first for one of the first times
ever
in that poll history.
Oh, yeah, ever.
And so, and yes, the Redskins are so bad that they
except for yesterday.
It was such a story. Yeah.
Carlos, is it true yesterday that the tickets for the game, did you hear anything about how low the ticket prices went for yesterday's game between the Redskins and the Lions?
No, but I saw that your email. I know what they went for the Jets game. They were at $6 for the Jets game.
No, somebody told me, and I think this was coming from a good source. I think I heard this on ESPN radio, that the tickets for the Redskins game were $4. Now, let me ask you this. You are right in D.C. You're right there. If somebody were to give you a ticket for yesterday's game, would you have gone?
You can't pay me to go to that game. Especially to see them play the way they play. I mean, the way they play the Jets game, I probably would have left early. I just never would have gone to go see that game.
Now, do you remember, Carlos, this is one of the things that were famous, and Chris probably remembers this. This is probably actually before he was born, literally. But do you remember how big of a deal it was to get season tickets and how long the wait was when you and I, not when we were kids, but we were clearly in our 20s? Do you remember that?
Yeah. They were like talking about 10-year waiting.
20.
That seemed like forever, 20. Yeah, now they don't have enough people buying the tickets. They had eviscerated that. Hey,
Well,
John, let me ask you a question because I don't know if you guys talked about this, and I don't mean to throw a wrench, but did you hear about what happened with the hockey player, one of the Caps, at one of the fights?
No. Well, give me more detail.
Games?
Give me more detail.
So they were playing. I forget. I think it was. I don't know, the Predators maybe. And there was this tremendous check at the back of the net. I mean, the whole play was phenomenal, but there was this check, and then there ended up being a scrum in the back, like several Caps against the other team were fighting it out. We happened to score a goal right then and there, which we thought was going to be disallowed, but was not disallowed. But in the fight, this whole hockey fighting, one of the Caps players is tied up by the ref, and he's tied up with the other player. They're kind of like, against each other, but the ref's got them both. Well, the opposing player sucker punches him a couple times, and then our player apparently spit on the other player.
Don't do that.
And he got ejected. He got a 3-game suspension, and there was all this conversation about, he got sucker punched. He was being held by the ref, which means you kind of don't fight, and there was all this going around about, like, was that, obviously that's sort of unsportsmanlike, but, to what degree is this? I mean, it's hockey, they're fighting, right? Like, and I was just curious as to, whether you had talked about it or what your feeling is on that. And if you had that experience, when you were reffing rugby, of a player that was so outside of the bounds that that you ejected him just for behavior like that.
No, I don't think I ever ejected anybody for that type of behavior. It was usually just for egregious hits. Like, for instance, as we spoke about, usually it just came down to what we call in the sport of rugby dangerous play. So somebody would basically just reel into somebody without trying to wrap them. The biggest ones I ever saw were people trying to tackle with their head against the other person's head. Like, they would not go down. And in rugby, it's against the rules to tackle anybody by their neck or by their heads. You can't, like, headlock them. That's one of the crazy things about football. They'll allow a defensive lineman to literally just headlock the guy and then drive him to the ground like it's a wrestling move. And I'm like, wow, that's a really good way to get a broken neck.
Oh, yeah.
But no, I think, and I mean this, and I think the reason it surprises me with spitting in games like hockey, football, and rugby is that there's so much aggression out there that, in a way, the guy takes a million steps back by spitting at somebody, right? Because there's so many other ways to actually hurt them, and all they're doing is throwing some saliva their way. So I think it's a strange kind of action, but no, in fact, I'm trying to look for that video as you were talking, and I think...
Yeah, it's actually against the Ducks.
Oh, got it.
You have to watch it because the whole play, the way it ensued, it was a tremendous check by one of probably the smallest guys on the cast. He takes out one of the Ducks in what looks like a legitimate hit, right? And then there ensues this melee, and then they score the goal, and then the melee continues, and then Garrett Hathaway gets ejected, and then the NHL reviews it and gives him a 3-game suspension without pay at a cost of $24,000 a game.
Wow.
And, you look at that, and we're talking about, suspending players and whether you get a red card. And, the Caps have a lot of players. They'll just call somebody up from the minor leagues to fill the spot. But, taking, something like that in the context of hockey where you can fight, that just seems odd. But everybody here had the opinion that was just wrong. You don't do that.
Yeah, I'm watching it right now. So they've already, interestingly, they fought, and then literally as the puck went away, they stopped fighting and started playing again. You generally don't see that. Okay, so here's the fight going on. Yeah, this is the Caps versus the Anaheim Ducks. Boy, there's some fists flying, that's for sure.
Yes. I mean, Grant the guy who got ejected, he definitely hurt a couple people in that. To me, that's a great topic. I mean, there's so much to talk about right there, right? Did the game stop?
Oh, yeah.
Was the check, the first check, was that legal? Then the fight, and then, I'm amazed that they allow fighting in hockey the way they do.
Well, but brother, I think it's exactly like, and I mean this, I think it's just like football. People expect there to be some violence, and I really believe this. If they took out all fighting from hockey, they would lose some of their viewership, and that's the last thing they want to do. So I think it's a don't do it, wink, wink thing, right? They say don't do this, and there's penalties, and there's fines, and so forth. But I think ultimately, behind closed doors, hockey knows that it brings in some fans. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah, it's kind of like in NASCAR, people...
They want the crashes.
They want races for the crashes.
Yep, and they don't want anybody to die, but they don't mind people getting hurt at the expense of seeing a crash. I agree with that.
Love to see like those restrictor plate races where you see a car flying through the air upside down. They love to see that kind of stuff.
That's right. Well, Carlos, let's end the conversation with this, because I promised the listening audience that we would chat about this. And last week, actually, it wasn't 2 weeks ago, I had a couple coaches of youth softball here, and we talked a lot about the relationship between the coaches and the player, the relationship between the parents and the coaches and so forth, and kind of like appropriate behavior and how to handle things there. But what we did not talk about, at least in any length, was how should coaches handle poor, and this goes really hand in hand with our previous conversation, right? But how should the coaches handle really bad calls by the referee, or in particular, I should say, or in general, like when a referee comes out and they seem unprepared, they seem like they're not at the level of the play that they're watching. What is your suggestion? Should they say something during the game? Should they go behind them and say something gently? Should they wait till after the game? What is the appropriate behavior, or should they say nothing?
And I think as a coach, when I've coached, and in the coaching that I've done with youth, you know, and I'm very much like you, or you and I are very similar, where we kind of I think we try to take a higher road in what we do, and we see things, and I think from a Christian perspective, that has a tendency to kind of overlay a lot of, I think, who we are, right, and our interactions with other people. So for me, some of the coaches that I see, and I'm kind of not answering this directly, but some of the coaches we're humans, right? So we have emotion, and that's going to affect us. But what you do with that, right? There are some people who are winning and egregious, calls. They will just say and rip somebody a rep. Doesn't matter if they're a kid or an adult, a male or a female. They'll just rip them. And to me, I just, that's not something that I would do nor encourage. I think sometimes you should say something. I think you maybe say it at halftime. I've said stuff at halftime and in a very calm voice.
Like what?
At the end of the game, like, ref, that number 10 keeps going off sides, or he keeps shoving this other guy.
Got it.
Right? Like, I might say something like that, or you got to call it both ways, or something like that. But just kind of very professionally and subtly, but just to bring attention, because
that's right.
I also think if you mention stuff, whether you're right or wrong, it'll make the person think, right? And I think that's part of coaching, right? Like, you try to influence the game different ways. But I don't think you need to rip them or abuse them, and I think that is morally wrong, right? It doesn't matter what the event is. I think that's wrong.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. In other words, what I think the sound Christian, maybe the inexperienced Christian coach or parent for that matter, might think that it's unchristian or even immoral to address the referee. But really what it is, it's how we address the referee. And I like your comment to bring attention to, because often the referee either doesn't see it or there's some form of intimidation, for instance, from the other coach, keeping them from making that call. And by you getting in their ear a little bit, you're kind of like, you're tipping the scales to have a more balanced view from them. And regardless, you don't know what's in their heart and what's in their head. But I don't think it's a bad idea. But I agree with you that it's not a bad idea. It's just a good idea to do it in a way that our faith, that our Christian faith would call for, and that's exactly what is called for in any situation, and it should not be any different in a situation with a referee or another parent, whatever the case is. Do you remember a situation, Carlos, where the person was particularly bad? The referee was particularly bad?
Yes. Yeah. I think you can't avoid being in sports or in any profession, right, and have somebody who's really bad. And there are bad coaches, bad refs, bad teachers, and you're going to get one, right? And some of it you're going to be so frustrated that you might even say stuff under your breath or on the sideline as the ref goes by or whatever. And it's hard to, as a human, I think, to keep your cool all the time, but that's what we try to do. And I think there's a lot of people that forget that the Christian, wearing the Christian, is not just in church. And I really think people forget to wear their Christian being, like, outside, like in sports. They think that, like in hockey, you have sanctioned fighting, right? Like, how's that Christian, right? But in reality, that's sort of allowed, and you kind of protect because there's other guys that are going to come in, like the enforcer, like you. So I don't know that makes it non-Christian or not, but there are ways in which you fight that could be, wrong, right? And so it's such a fine line. But I think, you're definitely going to get a bad rep, and you have to kind of address it. And I've sent in comments to the league about a ref or even a coach. You have I think a voice, and you have a responsibility to kind of say, this guy needs more training, or this guy should be reffing.
Yeah. Tell me about that, and we'll end on that note. When you sent in a formal, like a petition of sort, and it was a complaint, I guess you could say, against a fellow coach, what was the complaint?
Well, this particularly was a coach that was yelling at the refs, at his players, and at our players, and I just thought there was no place for that in youth sports. It was a tournament, and it was a terrible role model, and some of the stuff he was saying, I mean, it had distracted some of my kids who were, I mean, these are like, they were 11, 12, 13-year-old kids. It was shocking to some of them to see an adult yell. Like, I was shocked. I was intimidated as well. Right?
Absolutely.
Like, this guy was volatile. And so I submitted and said, this guy shouldn't be coaching. This guy, and I wrote a very professional, and I got a response to thanks for your feedback, and we'll look into it.
Interesting. Never knew what happened. We'll leave this for the next time we talk, but one of the things I want to ask you about is the Facebook page called Offside. Do you remember? I don't think we talked about this. I talked about this with a guest a couple weeks ago, but Offside was created. It's a website by a youth soccer referee, and basically he wants people to send in parents basically having gone bad at youth soccer matches. And what it turned into now is parents of all sport, people will take videos of them, and he encouraged them to send it in. And basically he wants to shame people into better behavior. And we have to go now. In fact, we went on a couple of minutes too long, but I thought it was all worthwhile conversation. But I want to leave you with that and look into that Facebook page, Offside.
Will do.
And I want to. And the main question I have for you is that a powerful and good tool to get people to act differently. Well, listen, folks, that's all we have time for with our guest, Carlos Herrera. Carlos, thank you very much for joining us. And as always, you'll join us again in a couple weeks, and we'll have another great conversation.
Thanks, John. Have a great day.
See you, buddy. All right, folks, you're listening to Faith in Sport here on Carolina Catholic Radio. Chris, we have a couple minutes left. Let's do this. Let's do the weekend headlines.
Okay.
And then maybe we have time for one of the questions, and then we'll go to our Pope quote of the week.
Okay.
All right, so in the world of college football, top 25, there were some huge games. Ohio State beat Penn State. I don't think either team looked particularly good. Auburn, no, it wasn't Auburn. It was Oregon got upset by Arizona State. That was a late game. That was the shocker of the weekend. But this coming weekend is called Rivalry Week. Rivalry Week. Did I even say that right the second time? I'm not sure.
So it sounded like Elmer Fudd.
Yeah.
Rivalry Week.
I think it did, Chris. I'm not even going to try to say that. This is the week in which rivals play each other. Yeah. OSU visits University of Michigan. That's, of course, the game that I'm most interested in, but that has playoff implications for sure. Alabama at Auburn. Wisconsin plays University of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. All these like local. In fact, I think Clemson plays South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And do you know who NC State plays?
Yep, they play the Carolina Tar Heels.
There you go. That's the rivalry.
Yeah, big rivalry.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
And this will be literally. I think this will be a close match because I think they're evenly matched team or a close game because they're evenly matched squad. So lots to look forward to in college football this coming weekend. In the NFL, I mentioned the Panthers lost a heartbreaker to the Saints. I think Panthers fans are reeling in disappointment from yesterday's game. Partly, as I mentioned, they had a chance to win the game and they ended up losing the game in the last seconds. The Packers got smoked by the 49ers last night. One of the things I said to Ed, Chris, was if that was reversed, did you watch that game last night by chance?
No, I didn't get to see that one.
The 49ers ran all over the Packers. And I said to Ed, I'm just wondering if we went back 24 hours and the 49ers came to Green Bay instead, would that outcome have been any different? And the reason I suspect that it would have been is because they've done research. There is no better home field advantage in any of the four major sports than in the NFL. And I think if that, even though the 49ers probably still would have won that game, it wouldn't have been like it was. I mean, the 49ers, they just stomped the Packers. The Redskins beat my Detroit Lions. I think we already talked about that.
Yeah.
And speaking of the Redskins and the Panthers, brother, the Panthers play the Redskins at home this weekend.
That's right.
And boy, the Panthers in trouble.
Yeah.
NCAA basketball, Duke remains number one. In fact, I have the stat of the week. Coach K, this is unbelievable stat, won his 217th game as the nation's number one team. So in all of his years, think about it, there have been probably 500,000 coaches who haven't played in or haven't coached in 217 college games in the top 25. And he has coached 217 games as the number one ranked team. By the way, they won, so they're still number one, I think, when the polls come out tomorrow. The NBA, it looks like Anthony Davis has found his home in the Lakers, and they are cruising with him and LeBron. They're 14-2. Former Hornet Kemba Walker has been hurt. But it looks like he's going to be okay. It looks like he just has a sprained neck and is expected back within a week. And the Celtics, I think, are the number one team in the Eastern Conference. We're going to talk, if we have a chance, we're going to talk about the new playoff system that the NBA is going to instill. But let's do this. Throw that first question at me because I think it has to do with college football. So let's talk about that.
Yes, it does. Since Alabama's starting quarterback is out, even if they beat Auburn, does this mean they'll be left out of the college football playoff?
I doubt it. The quarterback in question is Tua Tagovailoa. He's out. He had a hip operation. They're currently 5th in the college playoff poll. But here's the thing. They're not going to play. They already lost to LSU. LSU's going to play Georgia as long as LSU wins this weekend. Georgia is they have a tough game against A&M. I think they're both going to play for the SEC championship. The problem is once those teams are set, I think the pollsters are going to see Alabama as not a team that could truly contend because their Heisman hopeful, at least at one point during the year, is going to be out of the game. Mm-hmm. He's out for the rest of the year. And I think because of that, even though they won't state that, they claim that injuries have nothing to do with their voting. I think ultimately that's going to play a role. They're going to see that he's not there. Alabama's not as tough. And it's quite possible they'll be left out because of that. The shame of it will be this. If LSU, who beat Alabama, loses to Georgia, that is going to leave LSU and Alabama with the exact same record. Are they? You know my problem with this. Mm-hmm. Are they going to vault Alabama into the college? Boy, I hope they don't do that. But they just tend to do that. Whoever loses last is out. They just tend to do that. Mm-hmm. It's a darn shame. All right, we'll come back with question number 2 because that one can kind of float into the next couple of weeks. I think it's interesting. It has to do with the NBA and their new playoff structure that they're going to implement in the next couple of years, probably. All right, let's go to our Pope quote of the week. JP2 said this, folks. Remember, he reigned from 78 to 2005, and he had addressed athletes at all levels, coaches, referees, and so forth, especially soccer players, cyclists, runners. He in his pontificate, had addressed athletes more than any other pope in history. This is just one of the things he said. Lord Jesus Christ, help these athletes to be your friends and to witness your love. Help them to put the same effort into their interior life that they do in sports. Now, note that this was a public prayer to athletes nonetheless, but JP2 knew the mind of an athlete. He was a former athlete himself. He was very active up until the time that he really couldn't manage walking anymore. And he knew that training and competing in sport can take all of your energy. But his prayer really was a challenge to these athletes, was for each athlete to spend time on their knees giving thanks to our God, to praising our Lord, and to never forget that God, as the athlete's maker, can glorify God through competition itself. And that's where the athlete's heart should be, but it's not where it always is. And I thought that was one of the things that why JP2 was considered such a great pope. He spoke to the mind of the athlete, spoke to the heart of the athlete, and he knows how hard they work in their professional lives as athletes. And what he was doing is challenging them to have an interior life that's just as fervent toward making a relationship with God as it was to being a better athlete. And I thought that was a great prayer and a great challenge to those athletes. Folks, I want to thank you for joining us today on Faith in Sport. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. I want to mention again that I have a new book out. It's called Improving Your Body Image Through Catholic Teaching, How Theology of the Body and Other Church Teachings Can Transform Your Life. It's a brand new book out on by Tan Books. You can check out Tan Books at tanbooks.com. You can check them out on Amazon. And Chris, earlier in the show, I said the first one to email in gets a free book, and a gentleman wrote in about 3 or 4 minutes later, and so I'm going to send him the book. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
So somebody's going to get a free book. I'll get his information, and I'll send that out to you in the next couple of days. Let me hand it over to you at this point, Chris. And remember, folks, as Pope Francis, our current Pope, said, as in life, sport should be competing for the result is important, he said, but playing well and fairly is even more important. And before we go, I want to thank Chris Pressler, our in-studio producer, and for our guest that was on the line, Carlos Herrera, youth soccer coach from the D.C. area. So thank you to Carlos. Let me hand it over to you, Chris, and I'll see everybody next week. Everybody have a good Thanksgiving.
That's right. We want to wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving, and thank you for tuning in to Faith and Sport here on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network. And if you missed any of the show today, make sure you tune in for an encore presentation of Faith and Sport tonight at 10, and tune in at our other encore presentation times throughout the week here on Carolina Catholic Radio. And we want to again thank you for tuning in to Faith and Sport and wish you a happy Thanksgiving. And we'll meet you back here next Monday afternoon from 2 to 3 for more Faith and Sport Live with your host, Dr. John Acquaviva, on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.